Good afternoon. I would like to call this town council workshop of Tuesday, February 25th, 2025 to order. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Second.
We've got a first and second. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. So moved. So we got a couple of guests with us here today. Franny Heiser and Chris Crete. Franny is coming to us from Burr Foreman, a bond guru and local historian as well. So thank you for being here and helping us with this discussion. Yeah, and Chris has been a long time partner with the town and making certain that we address beach renourishment and other things properly. And you've been a good partner with us for a long time as well. So thanks for being here. So with that, we're gonna have some great discussion today to figure some things out. Gonna try to keep track of what everybody's saying and what their thoughts are, and then trying to get some kind of an idea of how we move forward out of this meeting today. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark or to Sean, okay?
Good afternoon, Mayor Perry, members of Town Council, Sean Lonnie, your Assistant Town Manager. We've already done the introduction, so we can skip that, but thank you to Franny and Chris for joining us here this afternoon. We appreciate your involvement and guidance on this important project in our community. So we have a two-part presentation that we want to go through with you today to help facilitate our discussion. The first part, I'll lead us through a brief update of the project and where we are. A lot of that's going to be review of information, but we do have some new information to share with you. And then really we'll spend the bulk of our time. I'll hand it over to Adriana and her team, and we'll talk through different funding options for the project. So as it relates to the project itself, beach renourishment is something that is covered through the town's beach management plan. As part of that plan, we identify that we will conduct beach renourishment every 8 to 10 years. The reason that's arranged is there's a number of different factors that impact our beach, are all weather related. So depending on the frequency of storms, the amount of erosion and accretion that takes place on our beach, because our beach is always constantly changing. It may be sooner than 8 years, it may be longer than 10 years, but generally within an 8 to 10 year time frame is when we will conduct beach renourishment. As part of this project, we will be moving over 2 million cubic yards of sand onto our beaches. We will also be placing 6 riprap breakwaters out at Pine Island on the back end of the island near HHP, or Hilton Head Plantation, sorry for the acronym. The sand itself, if you weren't aware, it comes from several offshore areas. You'll see those offshore areas located on a map. They're anywhere from 3 to 8 miles offshore. The sand is dredged and pumped onto the beach. And then placed as we go through the phases of our project, which we'll talk about here in a second. There will be disruptions as part of this project as they're working on the beach. Generally, those disruptions happen in 1,000-foot increments from anywhere from a couple of days up to a week. Generally, the project moves at the pace of about a football field a day. Again, that depends on different factors related to where they are working on the beach and how much sand needs to be deposited in that specific area. But it is a 24/7 operation and and we'll be moving along the beach in that sequence. The project schedule itself was developed and dictated to us through our permit, which was issued through U.S. Fish and Wildlife, through the Army Corps and with the state. It is not centered around when tourists are on the beach or not. It is centered around when the environmental conditions are on the beach, and that's specifically related to nesting sea turtles and migratory shorebirds. And we'll talk about what those windows look like here on the next couple slides. So on the project itself, it is broken into 2 separate permits that we will be receiving. One permit, when we last spoke in October, this permit was pending. We just received word, so this is some of the news that we have to share with you. Both the Army Corps and the state have signed off on permit number 1. Which it includes the South, Central, and North Beach and Fish Hall. So basically the green areas that you see on the map. While I'm talking about the map, you can see those red dots that are out in the offshore. Those are the borrow areas for where the sand is going to come from and be pumped and placed back onto our beach. But that permit is approved. We do have a second permit that is still pending that deals with Pine Island and the renourishment of Pine Island, as well as the 6 breakwater structures that are associated with Pine Island. We expect to receive that permit about the time, and Chris, kick me in if I have that incorrect, but about the time that we're going to be issuing the contract for the project. So in the next 60 to 75 days. As part of that permit, my colleague Sean Collin shared with town council recently that there was going to be a condition of our permit, and that condition of our permit deals with a small section of our beach out on Port Royal Sound, basically extending from the spa at Port Royal across the frontage of the historic Mitchellville Freedom Park over to Fish Hall Creek itself. And in that area, there is a large presence of migratory shorebirds in that area, and we have been required to restrict dogs from that location. The reason for the dog restriction is not always, but dogs do tend to disturb birds as they're on the beach and nesting. And so as a condition of accepting the permit, we will be required to put this in place, a dog restriction in place on this section of the beach. It will be signed, it will be clearly marked. We will also have to amend our beach rules, and we will have to amend our beach rules prior to the start of construction. So you'll see on our schedule on the next slide, we have that factored in, and we'll be presenting to town council an amendment to our beach rules to accommodate those requirements. So as far as where we are in terms of the project, the biological opinion has been issued. That was issued back in August. Permit 1 has been approved by the state. And then we are firmly into our pre-construction process and are able to now start bidding the project, and we'll expect to issue the bid here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. It'll be open for about 30 days. From there, we'll have to evaluate, select a contractor, and then negotiate, and then basically enter into a contract, and all the legal documents are associated with that contract. We expect to have that process completed sometime in May. As I mentioned, we will need to amend our beach park rules. We will submit that to town council, CSPS committee in April, and then work through the council 2 reading process in May. The project will be completed in 3 separate phases. The first phase, the permit window actually opens in June, and we've talked a lot about June in past meetings. We've talked about that as that's the date that we're going to start construction. That is not the date we're going to start construction. That is the date that the permit opens. That's when we can legally start to do work. But the practical reality of it is, by the time we get contractors on board and how they want to sequence and work from the north end down to the central end and then to the central section down to the south end, they are going to likely start sometime probably in late July or August. TBD, once we have a contractor selected, they will give us a schedule that'll map out more specifically and clearly where they will be on the beach or where they expect to be on the beach at any given time. So we are showing that phase 1, which deals with the north end, so Pine Island, renourishment, Fish Hall Creek, and the heel. Summer start of construction, end of construction sometime in September or October. That phase of the project is about, and just as an order of magnitude, is about an $18 million project. Phase 2 then will be the south and central portions of the project. Again, because of that sequencing, that permit opens up in September of this year and runs through May of 2026. So knowing that the contractor needs to be done by October on the north end, we expect them to arrive at the central and south ends in September or October. And then order of magnitude on that project, that is our largest nourishment portion of the project, and that's about a $27 million portion of the project. And then the final section will be, phase 3 will be the breakwater structures at Pine Island. There will probably be a break in construction and the contractor will return and install those breakwaters at a later date. And that's about a $3 million project for those breakwaters. There is a robust communications plan that's been put in place with the project team working with our communications department. This slide hopefully looks so familiar. We shared this back in October and what we're trying to accomplish with the communications plan to make sure we reach as many people as we possibly can on the island, off the island, that may be arriving on the island during this construction. You can see our target audiences anywhere from our residents and businesses to all the different organizations that are in our community. And then for the full breadth of how we're going to work with our media outreach to make sure that message is shared. To date, if you haven't looked at our website, we have a very robust web page dedicated to this project with all kinds of information related to the permits, the plans themselves, project or pictures and videos of past projects so you can get an understanding of what a beach renourishment project looks like. We'll use that as our central hub for disseminating information as part of the project ongoing, providing real-time updates on where we're working on the beach once we get into actual construction. We've distributed letters, we've distributed our newsletters, we've had media briefings, we've had media interviews through the project team. And as I mentioned, we do have an updated beach renourishment video that's been produced and shared through our various media channels. Next steps is once we get more definitive information with a contractor under contract, we'll then start to be able to provide more specific information to those same categories of folks, and then maintain that constant rhythm of information so people always know where we are, what we're doing, and when we're doing it. So that's what we'll do over the next handful of months as we get ready for the project and as we look forward to completing the project through May of next year. Those are all just a brief overview of where we are with the project. I'll pause here to answer any questions, Mayor, if that's okay, and otherwise we'll hand it to Adriana and her team to.
Okay. Does anybody on council have any questions at this point on the operational side?
Yeah, just two simple ones. In regards to phase one, do we know which activity is going to occur first, Fish Hall or Port Royal?
We do not. That'll be something that's driven by the contractor, but I'll look down the line to Jeff and Chris, who are much more involved in that detail than I am.
Yeah, we're going to give the contractor the flexibility to make that decision and give him basically a time period to work and let him, which is going to be most operationally efficient. And I think that'll be favorable to the bid pricing as well. We don't want to over constrain them too much in dictating how they do it.
Okay, and then I just want to make sure I understood correctly. You said the phase three was $3 million?
As an order of magnitude, yes.
Okay, all right.
We won't know the price until we have pricing, but just as an order of magnitude from estimates.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brown?
I sort of cringe bringing this up, but I need to. Is there a contingency plan? I appreciate the timeline, and I want us to accomplish this timeline. But we all know that things happen, so I guess my question is twofold. If there are circumstances that are out of our control, what happens? Because this timeline, particularly when it comes to the phases, seems to be working around our tourist season in those particular areas. So I'm curious to know, what if something happens? Do we shift or not? Okay, that's question number one. And are there any decisions that need to be made by us that could potentially disrupt the timeline?
So yes, there are a number of factors that go into construction, especially once we're going to be doing construction during the hurricane season. There could be things that disrupt our operation. If that happens, Chris has fortunately been with us for a number of beach renourishment. You've been for every beach renourishment we ever been through. We will have to assess that and adjust from there and make amendments to our permit. The track we are on, however, we believe we have a good track forward. We've done this before. We have contractors that are aware that our project is coming. We have no reason to believe at this point, other than a weather-related event, that would delay us from advancing the project as is laid out in our schedule, especially now having the main permit in hand. As it relates to decisions from town council, I think just having this workshop and understanding at the end of this for our funding options, how we're moving forward with payment, that's an important decision that we need to know to keep this schedule moving forward, this timeline moving forward.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. The question I really have is circling back to a decision that was already made. We now have our permit, but the restrictions for dogs on that portion of the beach and I understand from reading it that that's a permanent decision, but I've gotten a number of questions and I understand their concerns. When did the assessment that there were these migrating birds or these nesting birds, there? When did that occur? And what happens in the future if we identify that they no longer are taking a presidency in that space? Is there a way that we could back up and take that restriction out? And what happens in the future if there's some other identified need for protection of a species of animal, and another restriction is required? So, not sure if this is necessarily the best place for those answers, but if I can get those answers, yeah.
Yeah, so, the bird issue on Hilton Head, I think just a general knowledge, there's a lot of shorebird observations that occur throughout the Georgia Bight. This is a wintering area for piping plover and now the roofer red knot. Hilton Head, through our past projects, has had numerous mandated bird monitoring programs that have been going on for, at this point, decades. And so there's a pretty deep database now of the known activity, particularly of piping plovers, down to the individuals on the island that have occurred over the years. And so they understand it is to be a very important place. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has identified the northern end of Hilton Head as an area of priority in terms of habitat and area of use. And it really has been, this dog issue has been a long goal of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the island. And so it was, I've seen it coming for the last 20 years. It's something that there was going to be a push to do this based upon what they know about it now. But in defense of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and particularly the staff in the Charleston district, I have found them to be very reasonable in working with the town. And in this particular instance, there are some areas of the country, and particularly in the southeast, where we can't work at all in the summertime, and some even these shorter seasons because of nesting turtles. And when you find the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service having turtles and birds in conflict, some agencies will want to protect them all at the same time. But this particular office has worked well with the town over the years and prioritized their protections and given you the opportunity to work in other areas of the island where some of these other protections are needed to be implemented. Thinking about the future, it's hard to predict what will happen. Sometimes we find there's new listings all the time, new species, new critical habitat designations. And I think it'll just have to be something the town will need to adjust to and continue to monitor as you move forward with this program. Thinking about the beach overall over the last 35, 40 years in this program, there was really no sea turtle nesting habitat available on large portions of Hilton Head Island before the program. And now we've created all this valuable habitat, and all these, the turtles and birds that are now using it are finding it so attractive. So and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff in Charleston do understand that, hey, without this program, we wouldn't have these great habitat conditions. And so they have traditionally been willing to work with us. Don't know if that answers your question, but I think you really can't predict the future on how this might be adjusted or whether that's going to be a permanent thing or not. But I think given the remoteness and the difficulty accessing, that's probably probably should be a fairly permanent location. The birds tend to congregate where there's a lower activity.
It was a lot of great information. Thank you. And I do appreciate, I think Sean had mentioned that there was some negotiation that went on that made the area less expansive and kind of consolidated it. And that's good news. But I think for a resident focused island, our animals, our dogs on the beach are incredibly important to us. So moving forward, I think we all need to keep an eye on these types of things so we don't disturb what it is that Hilton Head is known for, which is a beach friendly neighborhood. So thank you for the information. It was a lot and helpful, and I will share it. Because there is a lot of concern about this. Thanks.
All right, Ms. Bryson?
Yes, sir, thank you. A couple of questions about the permitting and phasing. I'm looking at two documents before me. One refers to permit 2, which includes both phases, if you will, about Pine Island. One is the beach renourishment, and the other is the groins, for lack of, I think that's a term I remember. And then I'm looking at, one document that says there's 3 different permits, and the other one says there are 2 permits. And I know there are 3 phases. So can you clarify that for me?
So yes, I should have done that at the very beginning. We had a couple of minor tweaks to the presentation as we from the time it was released to your packet to the version today. The version that's up here, there are two permits. The Pine Island is rolled into a single permit, not split into two.
Okay, and you say that, the Pine Island, that area, the renourishment, I'm a little concerned about the timing. Is it the breakwater structures that are causing the holdup in permit approval, or is there another reason that it's being delayed, past permit one approval?
It was more of just a focus was on the main beach permit, and that's where all the different regulated agencies put all their focus on that main beach, because that was the most time-sensitive portion. It's not that they weren't focused on the Pine Island to permit two, they were, it just was, they put their efforts in the other one, and so this one is following closely behind. And again, we expect to have that in the next, probably 60 to 75 days.
Okay, you said 60 to 75 days, and I think I heard you say, because that's supposed to start in June or July of this year, June or July of this year?
The renourishment of Pine Island will be
Pine Island.
part of the June to phase one window, so yes, and we will have the permit in hand to complete the renourishment of Pine Island with the phase one window.
And so did I hear you say that about the time the contracts are issued is when the permit is expected? Seems like it's awfully close in time.
It'll be about, Chris, about the same time as what we expect based on our conversations with the regulating
So you
agencies.
can bid it out ahead of having the permit in place? Okay.
It'll be sequenced, so they will not be allowed to start that phase until we
Right,
have
sure.
permit in hand,
For sure,
so,
yeah.
absolutely.
And then, the last question about, moving forward is that, we're required to have some municipal code amendments, and I remember saying, let's accelerate that, because I thought it was holding up permit issuance. And so it looks as though we've gotten one permit, and my question is that holding up permit two? Okay,
No, it's a condition of the permit. What it will hold up is construction, so we have to have it done for construction.
so that's what I was gonna ask is about, what's the timing now on the municipal code amendment? So before June 1,
Really, before,
I'll help
or
with
May
that.
1?
I'll jump in. I'll help with that. Yeah, I've got I have a schedule here looking at bringing the municipal code amendment, right? And so town council, as a reminder, you passed a resolution committing to the amendment. That allowed the agency, the permitting agency, to have some confidence that they can issue the permit, yet the condition on the permit is we will not start construction until the code is amended. So I anticipate bringing the code amendment forward to committee in April with approval in May.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, just real quick, maybe makes everybody feel a little bit better, but the process that it's taking right now, is that pretty standard?
Yes, it's very standard. Yeah.
I just don't want to get in the weeds of trying to micromanage a process that they're typically adhering to on a regular basis, so, okay. Yes, sir.
I noted looking at 3 phases of construction. In phase 2, you've got South Beach and Central in the same phase, about 8 or 9 month period. Is there any knowledge at this point as to whether Central comes first, middle, or last, or doing both at the same time, since it's such a 9 month time period that's involved?
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that if I had a chance. The window that's presented for phase 2, it says September, October 25 to May 26 is actually the permitted timeframe they have. No expectation they'll take all that time. It's very likely they'll only be in the Central Island and South Beach area, probably 3 months at most. So it's likely, I anticipate if they start when we think they'll start, that the project will be complete by January or February of next year. The order of work, again, for those two pieces, we are currently not planning to dictate what order of work they choose, just again for efficiencies, to let the contractor decide what is most efficient for them, which it in turn hopefully turns into good pricing on the bid.
Okay, anything else? All right. Funding options.
Good afternoon, Town Council members. Good afternoon, members of the public. Thank you for being here. So I want to do this a little different. there's always an emotional connection every time we talk about money. And especially when it is our community's money. So what I would like to do here is make it a little personal. And by personal, I'm talking about actually utilizing examples of our day-to-day as I'm explaining the funding options that we have here today. So the first slide that you have here is in relation to how great we as a town are doing. We are a very privileged island where we have many sources of revenue. We have the opportunity of utilizing a lot of these sources of revenue for many, many different projects, both operating and also CIP projects, or capital improvement projects, also known as CIP. However, when we're talking about beach renourishment, something that I want to bring to your attention and something that I want the public to understand is, yes, we have all these sources of revenue. It doesn't mean that we get to use all the sources of revenue, because in some cases we have a state statutes that will prevent us from utilizing 100% of all these funds. In some cases, there's some local ordinances and statutes that you, the town council, either you or before you have passed, that will prevent us from utilizing 100% of a specific fund. So what I would like to do in this slide is actually bring to your attention these sources of funds that you see here are the ones that we can potentially utilize as we're thinking about funding this project. So the first one that I have here is the general fund. Some of you probably know, the general fund is what I see our checking account. This is our operating fund. This is how we pay for everything that is happening on this island. This is our pay for utilities. And there's also some requirements that we have created, or some ordinances that we passed a few years back. And it deals with the way we should keep our reserves on this fund. So for instance, we have a minimum 40% max and a 55% max based on our operating budget for this fiscal year. That means we have to stay within that range. So when we're thinking about potentially utilizing funds from the general fund, we need to keep in mind that there's a threshold, there's a restriction, and we need to make sure we stay within that. As we continue with the beach preservation fee fund, which is the next one, which is $44.8 million, I want to make sure it's clear. This is not called a beach renourishment fund. This is actually our beach preservation fund that is utilized for our maintenance of our beaches. It's utilized for some of the CIP projects that you approve in 25. And it's going to be utilized for, if you agree, for potentially other projects other than the beach renourishment project that we need to also pay in future years. So I just want you to bring that to your attention. Again, this is not a beach renourishment fund, it's a beach preservation fee fund. And then as we move to the hospitality tax, we have 25.7. Again, one thing that I didn't mention, this is as of January 31st of 2025. This is our fund balances. And then we have our state accommodation tax, which is about $9.2 million. So when we're looking at all these sources of funds that we can potentially utilize for our project, I want you to keep aware that also, and something that I skipped that is very important for you to know as it relates to the Beach Preservation Fund. Back in 2006, the town council members that were here in 2006, they decided to pass an ordinance to make sure we kept a minimum of $12 million as a reserve for natural disasters. So just because we see $44.7 million in this fund, $12 million have to be kept. Okay? Questions? No. Let's refrain the questions for later. So something else that I want to bring to the attention, the last 2 years, I'm talking 23 and 24, we as a town have done a great job managing our cash. This is a good example because we have invested our cash in a way that has created some interest. We have earned interest on the money that we have, on the cash that we have. Last year by itself, we have about $10.7 million on interest earned in all the funds that we have. That is a lot of money. So again, thinking about cash, keeping that in mind. I heard in the 40-plus years that I've been in this country, in our country, one of the things that I heard many times is cash is king. I like that saying, and now that I'm looking at this presentation and I'm looking at what we are thinking of doing for this project, I want you to keep that saying in mind. And there's another example that I have for you. Let's assume that you have been saving money for the last 5 years and you have managed to save $10,000. Let's assume that you have decided that it's time to replace your car. Let's assume that you have a neighbor that is selling a car that is the perfect car for you for $9,500. So something that I want to put in your mind is, do you pay cash? Do you pay $9,500 for this car? And you will have $500 left in your savings account. But what happens if you have an emergency? What happens if you have a tree falls on your roof and the insurance decides not to pay? So I want you to keep those things, those components in mind, because those are personal decisions. And our numbers here are even bigger than those decisions, because we're talking, and I'm rounding this number up, we're talking about potentially $50 million in cash that we will be paying to pay for this project. This one, I'm a numbers person, so if you look at that slide, 12 and 13 is actually the same thing. One is a number table representation, and the other one is a graphic representation. So why is this slide important? I want you to make you aware that when we're talking about debt for our town, this is not a brand new concept that just came up last year. As we start talking, even during the last 2 or 3 years, as we started talking about beach renourishment. We've been utilizing debt for our town for many, many, many years now. Actually, the last beach renourishment project that we had, guess what? We actually financed the project with debt. So we actually have, and there's another slide after that I want to get into in detail. But on this one, I want you to be aware that there's different things here. And I have to put my glasses because age is a wonderful thing. So here, what you have here in this graph is all the different bonds that we have. We have general obligation bonds, and I will be defining what that is later on. We have a special obligation bonds for hospitality fee. We have a special obligation for beach preservation fee. We have a special obligation bonds for tax increment financing. And we also have a stormwater revenue bonds. So this graph here represents all the different types of bonds that we have during the last 9 years, 10 years. And one thing that I do want to bring to your attention as we're looking at 26, 27, 28, we have some beach preservation bonds that are called callable bonds. That means we can go ahead and actually pay them off and remove them from this equation. So as we continue, notice that our debt continues going down to the point that I even want to mention, before I came to this meeting, I was asking my accountant, how much have we paid down in debt during the last 4 years? Almost $60 million. So we have paid a lot of our debt down. So it's not that we get debt and we just decide to keep it forever and ever and we never pay it. No, we have the privilege to be able to pay our debt, and we have paid a lot of it during the last 4 years. And by the way, Franny and John, please kick me under the table and tell me I have something else to add. So far, so good. Something else that I want to bring to your attention, and John here, by the way, he comes from Moody's, one of our credit agencies, and he probably can talk better than me about this table. But what I can tell you about this table is that this is where we are in the different rating agencies. We are actually, for general obligations, if it's under Moody's, we are AAA rating. For our beach preservation, we're AA2 rating. Hospitality fees, we're AAA rating. So what does that mean? Why is that important? Because when all these rating agencies start looking at us, start looking at our strength, financial strength, they're not only looking at our liquidity, they're also looking at our leadership team, the decisions that we make, how strategic we are. They're looking also at the policies that we have in place. They're looking at all the debt that we have, how highly or low leverage we are. So they're looking at many different components, but one of them that they're looking at is liquidity. So another thing to remember too, let's assume that we decide to spend all this money. And by the way, I'm not saying that cash is not the answer. Again, cash is king. I'm not saying the debt is the answer. I'm not saying the hybrid is the answer. But one thing to remember, if we decide to take $50 million out of our funds, then there can be a potential ramification with some of our ratings. Or it could stay the same. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. And I also want you to keep in mind that if something were to happen as our weather changes, we have more storms, we have more hurricanes. You know what just happened in this year? I just moved here about 9 months ago. And how many storms? I've been to 3 storms now. Chris, how many? 3 of them? So what I would like to bring that to your attention, if something were to happen, when you have cash, guess what? Banks are more willing to lend you money. When you have less cash, our cost of borrowing money goes a little higher. Mr. Moody's, anything else about this?
Well done.
Okay. So I've been mentioning general obligation bonds, and I've been mentioning special obligation bonds. So what is that? So the basic is general obligation bonds are direct obligations of the town via a property tax pledge. Versus a special obligation is, these are fees collected from a specific revenue stream. So they are attached to one of our revenue streams. So when we're talking about beach preservation bonds, we're talking about special obligations. One of the things that you also need to remember is, as it relates to the Moody's credit rating, general obligations bonds that we have today, they're AAA. The special obligations bonds that we have today, if it's a beach preservation bond, we are AA2, and hospitality are AAA. Another thing that we need to keep in mind as it relates to, if we're looking at 10-year growth, if we're looking at the special obligation bonds, we have brought so much revenue. We have received so much revenue in beach preservation during the last 10 years. Again, it is 126%. That is a huge revenue that we have received for our island in the last 10 years. If we're looking at a hospitality, we're talking about a 71% revenue growth. That is huge. One of the things too in the general obligations, the sales value of our property has gone up since 2016 by 35%. Our house prices are going up in our island. That is a huge growth as well. Let me mention another one that I want you to be aware. One of the things that I want to make you aware of this growth that we have here is that we can borrow money at a cheaper rate than any corporation out there based on where we are today, based on the strength that we have as an island. So I want you to keep that in mind as well as we continue talking about cash, debt, and hybrid. One of the things, again, going back to my wonderful example of buying a car cash versus buying, financing the car. When you have a strength in the numbers that you have, when you have money in your savings account, guess what? Banks want to lend you money. When you use all your cash, banks might be reluctant to lend you money. So the strength of our island is based on what we have on hand. I love this graph. This graph is actually our beach preservation special obligation. This is how much we actually have paid and how much we have borrowed during the last few years. So in 2006, we actually borrowed about $19 million. And in 2000, and this is the blue, dark blue color that you see on this graph. In 2011, this is the orange color, we actually borrowed about $11 million in bonds. And this was for a beach renourishment that we had back in 2011. In 2017, which was our last beach renourishment that we have here on the island, we actually borrowed about $30 million back then. So if you look at all these bar charts that you have here, notice that as we getting closer to 2026, 2027, and 2028, we have what we call callable bonds. That means we still have, as of August 1st of this year, you town council members need to make a decision. Do you call those bonds? Do we just pay those off? It's $7.5 million that we will have to pay. So before we make any determinations, either we do cash, either we do hybrid, either we do debt, we need to think about what is outstanding. And what is outstanding is $7.5 million that you need to make a decision. Do we pay that in cash before we even think about doing anything else? So this part here actually is telling you that where we are now, as it relates to beach preservation fees and special obligation bonds, we almost finished paying that off. There's only $7.5 million left. Anything else that you would like to add?
Just the payment date in 2026 and in every year is August 1st. So we've got the 2026, we have an obligation to pay that, but on that same date, we can call those two remaining bond principal amounts.
Yes, so we don't want to do this decision on August 2nd, August 3rd, August 4th, because then you have to pay interest. The decision has to be made on August 1st to avoid paying any interest. So it would be just principal at this point, which it would be about the $7.5 million number that I just mentioned.
And so, Mayor and Council, I want to make sure that we just pause on that for a second because August 1st is an important date for us, you, to decide on the callable question. One thing I would like for Ms. Burnett to clarify is if not on this August 1st, when is the next opportunity? Is it forever lost? Is it gone forever? Or is it next year on August 1st?
And Franny, you may be best to answer that.
It should be anytime after the August 1st of this year. So it's not tied to August 1 for the redemption. You could, I will text somebody and make sure that I'm answering that correct. But usually once you've hit a call date, you are able to call the bonds at any time with like 30 days notice.
Okay, there is a benefit,
I
there
think
is
the
a,
difference is the interest portion that you
Correct.
will accrue at that point.
and I think that's what I'm looking for an answer on, and I think the council needs to hear that, because on August 1st, it's callable, the decision's made, interest is not a penalty, so to speak, on the funds. But is August 2nd and beyond for the end of time on this bond, you would pay interest? I think that's an important piece to make sure we talk about. Because I believe that either we, pay it on August 1st or just let it ride out. We do not need to be in a hurry post that date.
Yeah, and regardless of what decision is made, whichever option you pick, I think it is to our advantage to start thinking about potentially call those bonds and pay the 7.5 and just not have any additional debt. Again, cash flow is another component. Do we pay the $7.5 million now, or we just wait and pay the $3.4 million or so on every year like we've been doing until now? So again, it depends on the appetite as it relates to cash flow. It depends if you just want to get rid of all debt and you just want to pay it off.
Sorry, Mayor, can I ask a question about that interest question? So would not the interest be prorated, or do you pay annual interest at one time?
Right now,
For
the
instance,
interest is
if
paid
instead of,
annually.
if after August 1 of 2025, you decide to pay all or part of the remaining principal, would not the interest be prorated rather than
It
for a
it
whole
will be
year?
prorated, yes.
Yes,
Yes, it will be prorated.
So
So
you
we
would be
pay
penalized.
interest, yes.
You'd only be penalized by the months during which you did not pay it off.
Exactly. So if you decide to wait until day 30th, then in that case, it will be prorated and then you will pay interest for those 30 days. Please
Yeah.
correct me if I'm
Thank
wrong,
you.
Franny. Okay. There was a question that was asked in October, in the last workshop we had. The question was, well, during the beach renourishment, was there any impact to our revenues? It is hard to predict what's going to happen in the next beach renourishment. I know with all my best intentions, and Mr. Brown, I know we talked about the crystal ball the other day, but there's no crystal ball. But I can tell you historically, from history, when we did our beach renourishment last time, if you look at where it says 2018, and let me see if I can point this area here. This is when we had our beach renourishment last time. As you can see, there was a big increase in our revenue from that point in time. So based on historical records, on the information that we have today, the answer is no. There was no obvious impact to our revenues because of the beach renourishment that took place. Again, that can change. I don't know, but based on history, there was no impact. Notice too, the revenue that we show here for beach preservation fee is right now flat. I mean, we had a big spike back in 2020. Guess what happened in 2020? We had COVID, and I know our island was very fortunate to be able to have all the many visitors that we had. So our revenues went up for beach preservation. But again, another thing that I want to bring to your attention on this graph, the orange represents the debt service that we have. Notice that our revenues surpass the debt service. That means we are very low, the leverage, low, have you heard the expression high leverage? You're very high leverage, that means we're not. Our revenues surpass the debt service that we have. So that means we have the range to be able to accommodate, if this is what you desire, additional debt because our revenues are high. So we can potentially do, and I'm not saying that, Chris, by the way, we can potentially accommodate the funding of another beach renourishment because of the revenues that we have as a town. Something else too is that revenues are growing faster than the actual debt service. That's something else to think about. So this is a representation of the growth that we have in our beach preservation fund. Again, I'm thinking that beach preservation fund is going to be the primary source of funding. So this is the growth. As you can see, this growth, and this is a cumulative growth. If we're looking at the last 3 years, in 2022, we had $27.6 million, and then it grew to 36.2, and then it grew again to $43 million. So it is growing. So our fund is growing. And maybe I should have started this presentation by mentioning these items here. But back in October of last year, the assumption was that our project was going to cost about $42.5 million. And then now it's to $48.5 million. We don't know what it's going to cost. And for a financial person like me, it is kind of hard to quantify and to give you models and projections and give you all these things when I don't know what the final cost is going to be. But based on $48.5 million is what we're using right now for all these graphs and all this representation, except for the last slide that we have. Something else that we found, or that as part of John and myself being new, one of the things that we're looking at is all the different policies, all the different things that we have. And we have found that $12 million was a reserve that is required because of the ordinance we passed in 2006 that we have to maintain in the beach preservation fee because of natural disasters. One of the things that you also need to keep in mind is that we are at a different time from last year. The borrowing rates have increased between 20 to 30 basis points since October 30th of 2024. Something else to also, and I already mentioned this, the callable bonds, so I don't want to spend time on that. Another thing to consider too is, and again, this number is probably going to change because I know Jeff and Sean are still working on how much money do we need to carry forward? And maybe that number has changed because now we have a better idea that we have a permit. So we're thinking that potentially we might have a carry forward. Remember, you approved $16.5 million for beach renourishment in 2025. And I know for a fact we're not going to be utilizing 16.5 for the remaining of the year. So there's going to be a carry forward too for the next year. So that's something else that now we probably have better information. So these things are things that are new, and in some cases are things that you already knew about the project that I want to make sure you are aware. The next one is actually the template that we presented back in October. The template shows still the same $39 million number that we worked on last month, with only a few differences that we have made changes. Again, it's kind of hard to predict what it's going to be if we don't have the final number. We did make some changes on some of the numbers. The assumption is that we're still getting the same revenues of 13.8. The assumption is also that we are going to get FEMA money, reimbursement, to also potentially offset some of the costs. So taking all of those into equation, taking into equation that we have a callable bond. So we're anticipating if we use all cash, if we decide to utilize option one, then by the time June 30th of 2026 comes, the expectation is that our remaining balance under the beach preservation fee is about almost $700,000. Again, this is utilizing the fund that we have today. This is thinking that we're not going to be doing any other projects in the utilizing beach preservation fund, which that creates some challenges too, because we have to maintain our beaches. We have to do some projects. So if we utilize all our cash, then we need to figure out how else, what other fund balances do we need to move from the ones I presented before to be able to pay for this? $700,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but so please be aware of that number. If we utilize option, I'm going to skip option 2 for now, but if we utilize option 3, again, the same assumptions that we utilize in the cash option, remember, we're getting an influx of money because once we finance, then we're going to get money in. And with the money in, that means we're going to have a balance of $49 million that we will be utilizing to pay for any CIP projects, or even to continue paying the borrowing of this money. We have to pay principals, we have to pay interest on the new money that we have borrowed. But it is a better position because we have money there, and in case something were to happen, there's money there that we can potentially utilize for any beach-related projects. If we utilize the one in the middle, again, we are making the assumption that we're doing a 50-50 split. At this point, we don't have that split defined yet, but if we utilize a 50-50 split where we actually borrow part of the money and then we use our cash, then the expectation at the end of June 30th, 2026 is to have about $27 million as a balance for this beach preservation fund. Again, it is in the middle. So again, 700 cash, 49 if we finance the whole amount, or 27 if we do half and half. And the last slide, which to be honest with you, this is my favorite slide. This is what I call my pros and cons. Again, utilizing the template that I just discussed. This is the remaining balances as of June 30th of 2026. Option 1, cash, 700. Option 2, hybrid, 27. And option 3, all financing, 49. The estimated annual debt service payments between fiscal year 27 to 2036, we're making the assumption that it is about 10 years that we will have a debt service, because we are thinking that every 8 to 10 years, we have to do a beach renourishment. So there is no debt service because, of course, we're paying cash under the first option. If we look at option 2, we're thinking that there's going to be potentially $3.1 million that we will have to pay per year to be able to utilize, to borrow half of the money that we need for this project. And then if we look at option 3, then that number is now 5.8 because we are financing 100%. So again, this is making the assumption that based on the information and the assumptions we're making today, that we will have to pay about $5.8 million every year. Remember, right now we pay 3.4 in the bond that we have every year. So this one will be 5.8. I just want you to compare those two numbers. 3.4 we pay today, 5.8 will be the new number.
So we're paying about 3.9 now.
3.9, so it's even higher. So it's almost close to the 5.8. Thank you, John. The estimated coverage ratio, and this one is an interesting formula. So it is the pledged revenue divided by the debt service payments. So of course, under cash, there's no calculation. Under option 3, which is all financing, we are saying that 2.39, we're able to cover our debt based on our revenues, 2.39. And Mr. Moody's here, AKA John, tells me that anything above 2 is great because we're able to cover our our debt with the revenues that we have. If we finance half and half, our coverage even goes double, which is 4.48. That means we have revenue to pay for our debt. Our ratings. So again, this is just based on the different type of things that they look at when they come and do a rating. So of course, using cash, we don't there might be no change on the rating. We don't know at this point, but we're anticipating hopefully not, because we're going to continue receiving revenue. And we have still a good fund balance. So we're hoping that that will be the case, that there is no change on our rating. We don't know that for sure. Then the next one, it will be hybrid. Probably there's a potential upgrade. We will have a potential upgrade on if we do the hybrid option. And then if we do the 100% financing, most likely there will be no change on our rating. If we look at the next line is the natural disasters line. It will be weak. Remember, we're utilizing our cash. That means if we have a disaster, yes, we do have a reserve for disaster. But again, we had a category 2 last time. We had Hurricane Matthew, I think it was.
16, yeah.
It was in 2016. It was about $56 million. So, and this was only a category 2. By the way, I grew up in Miami and I went under Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. That one was a category 5, and I can tell you, everything was gone in the areas that Hurricane Andrew hit. So again, it is weak, utilize the cash option. If we look at the hybrid, it is stronger, especially in the first few years after project completion. And then if we utilize option 3, it's going to be even stronger than option 2, especially again in the first few years of the project. Because of course, we will have more money in hand. And then if we look at the financing cost, there's no financing cost with cash, you're paying cash. If you use hybrid, the option 2, the financing cost will be higher than, of course, utilizing cash. However, it will be still lower than the taxable debt. And then, of course, we use option 3. This is the highest total financing cost. It still will be lower than the taxable debt. So, and then one of the things that I do want to bring to mind, and I'm skipping one because I'm going to have John explain that one. He loves explaining that one, by the way. Investment income on remaining cash. I like this question. So we're taking, remember the example again to the car? I love that example. $10,000 savings, you took $9,500. Do you expect to make the same interest? Because you only have $500 left. So the answer is no. Your return on investment for the money that you have is going to be low, is going to decrease because you're going to have less money. So if you're expecting to make $10 million as you did last year, then there's a big chance that, well, let me rephrase that. There's no chance you're going to get $10 million. If we use the option 2, there will be a medium. I mean, we're still doing some financing. So it's going to be a medium return. Potentially not going to be $10 million, but it's not going to be very, very low. I mean, interest rates are not the same as what they were last year, but we will have more money. So therefore, we will have interest earned. And of course, if we use the 100% financing, then we have more money. Therefore, we will have more interest earned for our island on our fund balances. John, you're it.
Yeah, on that second to the last line, basically ideally you're matching the benefits of the amenity, in this case, a nice new beach, relative to the people that are paying for it. So in the case of our last beach renourishment in 2017, if you were spending a month on Hilton Head, let's say the last 3 years, you were paying debt service on that amenity that you enjoyed over those 3 years. Those same people, if we went cash only, are essentially, we've seen that the fund balance has increased each of the last 3 years. Those people have actually paid for the next 10 years worth of beach. as opposed to in a debt situation where you're matching the payments for the benefit, that is the debt service of the benefit, with the enjoyment of the benefit. So that kind of that does go away if you're paying all cash. That makes sense?
So to summarize, thank you, John, and to summarize, it is a big decision. I mean, the decision that you're making on behalf of our community is a big decision because we're talking a lot of money. So we're talking potentially $50 million, and at this point, we don't know what that's going to be. If it's going to be 50, it's going to be less, it's going to be more. The good thing is that we have options. We are in a very privileged situation, again, very fortunate that we have 3 options. As we get closer to actually having a definite number where we actually know how much this is going to cost, then we can utilize real numbers to start talking about these projections and give you better information. So those are the next steps for me to make sure that once we get real numbers, real costs, we can come back to you and say, this is what it's going to cost in all the different options. Right now, we're just making many assumptions. And I hope we were able to answer a lot of the questions, if not all the questions you had back in October. So thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you. This slide is probably the most important slide because, again, we're making a lot of assumptions here. I don't have any questions, just want to make, well, I do have one question before I make my comments. I'm focusing on the natural disaster preparedness column. So if we re-nurse this beach on the timeline that we have before us, and then we have the unfortunate occurrence of a hurricane come and take away half of the sand, we are then in a position where we have to replace that sand. And typically that would be through a reimbursement process through FEMA, but we have to cash up first. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. As it pertains to which option, I am leaning towards a hybrid option because of that mere factor that is not necessarily an assumption. In this area, it's not if we're going to have a storm, it's when we're going to have a storm. So with that being said, I think we need to make sure that we position ourselves to deal with that, okay? And using all of our cash does not help with that particular situation. Now, with that being said, I'd also challenge staff to take a look at our threshold when it comes to our beach preservation fees. Obviously, this beach renourishment is costing us more than the last beach renourishment, and I'm going to assume that maybe the next one will as well. You also throw in the likelihood that FEMA reimbursements may take longer than they have in the past. So there are a lot of factors there, and the last time we touched this threshold was 2006. I think we need to take another look at that to see if we need to make some adjustments as we make this decision as to how much we're going to borrow or not. So those are my comments on this topic, sir.
Okay, thank you. Next, Ms. Donner?
I would say that your cash scenario is very pessimistic. And the reason is, the first assumption is that we're going to pay back our bond. So I'd be interested to know how much is that interest rate on that bond versus the money that we are investing. And if we are making more money in investments than we are in what we're paying for the bond, it wouldn't make sense to pay that off earlier. And I can give you a perfect real life example because you were using real life examples. I'm in that situation now with my home. We refinanced many times. We have a great mortgage rate, fixed rate, and I make more money on my investments than I do as a percentage than I do on my mortgage. And so I think we need to take a look at that. And I think that would give us a very easy answer as to whether we would want to pay that off early. In my mind, it would make no sense to pay it off early if we can make more money, investing it. than paying it off. And what that does is it allows $7.5 million more dollars into the column at the end of the year. The other piece is the Pine Island, and I know that things have changed since the first package came out versus what was on the table, and I don't have a copy of the one on the table. But when I was looking at Pine Island, this also assumes that all of the beach renourishment work would be completed in the fiscal year 26. But at least when I looked at the original package, it showed that the Pine Island, whatever those things are, those things in the water, that was going to be determined, and everything was being done in a linear fashion, which made it look like that it would actually fall into the 27 fiscal year. So if you move that money from the 26 fiscal year into the 27 fiscal year, then you have another year of adding additional accommodation taxes. And so now we're not looking at a picture of being at $663,000 at the end of the year. We're looking at something close to 12 million, as well as close to 12 million the following year, if my math is right, which aligns to the minimum category. In addition, there are other monies too, hospitality tax. So my bias is always to look to see if you can pay cash. You ask the question, do you pay cash for a car? I pay cash for a car. I appreciate your example, but the town doesn't have $10,000 and is looking to buy a car for $9,500. We have a lot of money. And so, that opportunity is there. So that's where I'm leaning right now. I personally like to know, of the prior debt that we had, what did we use that for? Obviously, I know
Beach renourishment.
well, yeah, beach renourishment and stormwater.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry,
there was
you-
also a general
talking overall.
obligation, a hospitality and TIF. I'm just curious as to how we've used debt in the past. Okay, thank you.
Well, one thing that I want to mention, and thank you for your comments. One thing that I want to make sure, and it was the first slide that I talk about as it relates to the sources of funding. One of the things that I learned coming from corporate to government, when you are in corporate, you have a big pool of money that you allocate and you pay for whatever projects you have. Unlike government, we do have a lot of money. We're very fortunate to have the balances that we have in this island. But it's not that we can use 100% of that money to pay for whatever we want. There are restrictions. Some of them come from the state, like I mentioned before, but some of them are ordinances that have been passed by previous town council members, or including yourself. Some of you have been here for longer. So as we're looking at the different sources of funding, we need to keep in mind that there is restrictions, there are reserves. Some of them maybe to your point, Mr. Brown, we probably need to revisit again. Because maybe by the time we pass them, maybe make perfect sense. Maybe now it doesn't make sense. $12 million in 2006 is not $12 million today. You know that saying about $1 today is not $1 in 20 years? So a lot of things have increased in prices, beach renourishment being a great example, and I'm looking at Chris here because I know the number is huge. So yes, we can look at how much we're going to be spending in this first year for beach renourishment based on now having a permit, based on now that we can do a better job of thinking, okay, now we have a permit, now we have to go out there and look for a contractor to help us look at this. Moving money, it will require us to be thinking about callable bonds. It will require us to be thinking about CIP projects that we have today that you approve in 2025. Then the question that we have is, do we complete those projects? Because some of them we haven't we probably are in the design stage. Do we complete those projects, yes or no? Do we add new projects in 2026? So if we decide to use cash, to your point, Ms. Turner, the question is, we have to make some hard decisions. You have to make some hard decisions about what projects you really want to get done.
Well, I don't know how many CIP projects are associated with the beach renourishment fee and that fund reserve. Because if we're borrowing money because we want to make sure that we have enough money to cover our costs as well as have a cushion in case something happens, then we're saying that that is money for beach renourishment. I appreciate that we have other projects that we would like to complete, but then it almost sounds like we're saying that we want to use those money for those other projects. And if we want to use those money for those other projects, then let's be transparent about it and say it's not about beach renourishment fees, it's about funding other projects.
Unfortunately, that's a decision that you town council members have to make as it relates to the other projects.
Did you have something to say?
No, I was looking at Mark.
They're watching me jump out of my chair, wanting to hear from you.
No, I would imagine that has something to do with the budget conversation as we move forward to that. Mr. Alfred?
A couple of questions and then some of my own thoughts. Have you indicated what the likely maturity of borrowings would be?
It will be about 10 years, yes.
So it's associated with roughly with the life of the asset. as
It
Joe
is. It is
was pointing
associated
out.
with the beach renourishment.
I notice in all of your examples here, you're calling the bonds that are callable in 26. Led you to conclude that in all three situations to call those bonds.
So here's an interesting situation. John and I, and by the way, something that I failed to do at the beginning, this presentation, John has worked so hard to research and do so much of this work in coordination with Franny and all of our other consultants. So as we were talking about the bonds, what is the appetite for? And I'm talking your appetite, town council members. Do you want to, if you go to with the option 3, if you decide to do option 3, the question is, do you feel comfortable with rolling over the remaining bonds into a new financing arrangement? Based on what I heard from you in the past, I feel like that wasn't the case. I feel like you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to start fresh with a new debt financing. Either you use hybrid or you use 100%. So that's just my assumption that I'm making based on the comments that you all have made about potentially not feeling comfortable with rolling over $7 million into another bond. So that's just my assumption, thinking that you might not be open to that.
I think personally that I would be most comfortable with a hybrid approach. The reasons for that is I like the idea of financing the asset over its life. We've got a 10-year asset, 10-year bonds. I also think it's more conservative of an approach because we don't know what nature is going to bring to us in the coming years. And it isn't just hurricanes. When we get some bad storms, good part of the beach on the south end of this island is gone, and that has been happening regularly. Boardwalks are gone, you got a 4-foot drop. That wasn't even in a hurricane, it was in the storms from a month or two ago.
We even have got snow.
That's not what caused it.
We'll be talking about snowplows now. Don't.
So, I am very concerned that we be conservative and have enough cash on hand for what is likely to be an increasing frequency of storms. On the other hand, I personally am interested in other projects. We have over the last year been working extensively on parks and roadways. And if we want to do some of those, we may want seriously to consider bonding. To the extent that I would be interested in bonding for other projects, I don't want to go too far on bonding for the beach. I end up with a hybrid approach.
Thank you, sir. I also favor the hybrid approach, and I compare it to my personal life. You know, do I want to use all my cash to make repairs on my house, or do I get, some sort of equity line to pay for those 2 HVAC systems I might have to replace pretty soon? Although I don't get the same kind of interest return that the town does on my cash, I would need to talk to your advisors. I would rather have that in case of other kind of emergency. So that's why I favor the hybrid approach. I do have a couple of questions though. One is I am interested in whether to call or not. And I think that depends upon the interest rate and what our combination principal and interest payments would be for the first couple of years where we would double up, to see what financial impact that would make. And so that would make a difference into how much is borrowed. So I'd like to know the answer to that one. And as I understand it, these three approaches would not have none of these approaches would increase the millage rate. That's my understanding. I just want to confirm that. And the cost of issuance of bonds, as I recall, is folded into the borrowing.
Right.
You don't have to also pay it, like closing cost in buying a home, you don't have to pay extra money on top. Okay. And then phase 3, those structures, groins, whatever they're called, the cost of phase 3, even though we don't yet know when we're going to do it, is included in the cost, the estimated cost of the 46.5, I think it is, yeah. So that cost is included. And then term's been answered. What do we think is going to be the interest rate range for bonds that would be issued in perhaps August of this year? Do we have a forecast range?
The last run that our financial advisor did had us paying a blended rate of about 3.53%.
Okay, all right. And our current rate is what on the 2017 bonds?
It's less than 2%,
Okay.
No, it's just over 2, just about 2.
just about 2.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then what is the timeline for issuance of bonds for this year? When do we have to start? When does our first reading on a bond ordinance need to end? And what's the process for it? Is it 2 readings of a
Miss
bond
Franny,
The timing on when to issue bonds will be decided by y'all and the staff. If you're going to know in May what the contract costs are, then you would not want to make your final determination on the amount to borrow until you know the cost. That works nicely if you're looking to have money in the bank by August, depending on y'all's schedule. If we leave here today with the sense that the hybrid or that you will be borrowing something, then we can start some of the paperwork so that you wouldn't have to wait a long time for a preliminary official statement. You probably won't go to the rating agencies until the summer when you've decided what the price, the amount is going to be. The process is that y'all have to adopt an ordinance, and that's a 2 reading process. Generally, our ordinances for this type of debt set the parameters and delegate to the town manager the authority to make the final decisions. We would probably have a not to exceed number, although if y'all feel strongly about it and you know the cost, then we can have an exact number. If to the extent that we are the decisions about exactly when to sell the bonds and the exact maturity schedule, those details would be determined by the town manager. Y'all have a well-developed rule that you do not change ordinances between readings. And so we would want to know what y'all want in the ordinance before you give it first reading. And we would need time in the summer, June, July, to have 2 readings. They don't have to be in the same month. I mean, you can have it one in June and one in July. So that's really the process. Y'all are the ultimate decision makers. And once you've made the big decisions, you leave it to the staff to implement your decision.
Okay. And another related bond question, while I'm looking at you, is that your firm had made a presentation about an opportunity for a different type of bonds other than GO, general obligation bonds, or special obligation
Right.
bonds. And that is, I'll try to get this right, installment purchase revenue bonds.
That's it.
A couple of folks on the council have already mentioned we have other things that we're interested in doing and may need to find some funding. So is it possible to blend this type of bond, Beach Renourishment bonds, into an installment purchase revenue bond to be able to do other things, or based on timing and based on what we can and can't do with those two types of bond structures, should we separate them?
For those of y'all that haven't heard a presentation on installment purchase revenue bonds, that is debt that is issued, tax exempt debt issued on behalf of the town by a nonprofit corporation that you create for the town. That the separateness between the town and the nonprofit as the issuer causes the installment purchase revenue debt to not be considered general obligation debt of the town. It's something that school districts used extensively until 2006. The legislature changed the rules. Installment purchase revenue bonds are now available only to municipalities and counties. They do work well when you have a number of different projects that might be paid for from a number of different revenue sources. And y'all do have many different revenue sources, including your real estate transfer fee. So again, depending on the nature of the project, they could be paid for under installment purchase revenue bond, and then you would literally match the sources of revenue to the individual projects. The disadvantage is that those are even more complex than these revenue or special obligation bonds. Your cost of issuance is higher, and it is largely based, well, it's based on two things. On paper, it's based on the projects that you are building, and you make a commitment that on an annual basis, the town council would decide whether to appropriate or not appropriate. So we call that non-appropriation debt. The non-appropriation debt has been used in South Carolina my entire career, which goes way, way back. And y'all started using it for what I know is the first renourishment I worked on in the mid-90s. So the nature of the projects have to be, or tend to be something that if you don't pay, if you choose to use non-appropriation, you lose the use of that asset. So if you were doing a new town hall, you didn't make the payment, you'd have to move out of town hall. And you say, well, how do you mortgage, how do you give sand as a collateral?
But just give it back
It's
to
really
the ocean.
based on the second aspect, and that is the town's credit worthiness. That you would have no problem really financing almost anything you wanted to, that met IRS, regulations, because people who would buy that debt know that the town of Hilton Head Island is going to pay its debts. You are not going to non-appropriate. In the special obligation bonds, you will pledge you will pledge the necessary portion of your beach preservation fee. So that's an enforceable contract that you promise to make those payments from beach renourishment. You also can, and we would recommend that you give that what we call a second barrel, which is that you make not exactly, you make a commitment that town council could choose to use other legally available sources of revenue if there was a shortfall in your beach preservation fee. So looking at the numbers, it's not realistic that you would have a shortfall, but if you did have a shortfall, you're not legally obligated to go to any other pot of money. But you could choose to use general fund, proceeds of general obligation bonds, and that second possibility of another source of revenue makes the bonds even stronger in the marketplace. But y'all have so much liquidity. Y'all have such a good history, such high credit ratings that y'all really are diamonds when you go into the market. And almost any form of debt that y'all would pick, y'all would be getting as good an interest rate as anybody in the country.
So Thank you very much for that explanation. That's very helpful. So based upon, the timing of, the installment purchase revenue bonds, I want to make sure I got purchase and revenue in the right order, and the beach renourishment bonds that we're talking about, the special obligation bonds, it would seem as though if we're going to think about doing some financing for other projects, it would be better to separate them.
I think so, and I think the deliberate way that y'all go about making your decisions, would be such that the beach project needs to be focused on and taken care of. And then the possibility of other capital improvement projects that y'all might be interested in funded through installment purchase or general obligation or other
Special
types of
obligation
debt. So I do think that those two probably need to be, separated.
And Mayor, then I have another financial question, and that is, based on the chart, and I apologize, I don't know which number it is, but where you showed, the revenue was coming in, versus the debt. So that even if we do, financing of this particular issue, what I was wondering about was how much money would we have to put away each year after you pay the debt service to accumulate some beach renourishment fees to go towards the next bond issue, so we don't have to borrow all of that. And it looks as though there's a gap. I've forgotten, it seems like it's orange and I've forgotten the other color.
Talking about the
Maybe
line
next
chart
one.
or this part?
Yeah, the line chart, the line chart. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
So I think I heard you say, and hearing a 10-year issue, that over that 10-year term, while we're paying down the debt, if we choose to go that way, that we would still be able to accumulate some funds to put away in that to take, so we won't have to pay, we won't have to borrow the full issue of the next renourishment.
Yeah, in fact,
That's correct.
that orange line, which is the debt service on the current bonds, in the hybrid scenario, or option 2,
It would go
that line would actually be lower.
unless we double up for a couple of years by not calling the current bond.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons we're not suggesting if we do a bond issue to keep the callable bonds outstanding, because that chart that Adriana, the chart prior,
Yeah.
that bar chart would roughly double in size the last couple of years.
For a couple of
And that would
years.
blow our coverage ratio. That would make our bonds a little
Right.
more risky.
Right, okay, thank you.
But you also have to add the
Any
6.5 million that you spend in CIP and operating costs as well on that gap exhibit. I mean, you're showing the total revenues and you're just showing the debt. You also have to show the operating costs and CIP, which you've said about $6.5 million as well. So I just don't want people to think that we just be collecting that delta that you're showing on that exhibit. That's not accurate. So I just want to make that clear.
For that presentation, but yes, certainly every year we're spending money on operating and other capital projects from this fund.
Hang on.
You talked about $10 million.
I think your mic's not.
$10 million that we receive a year in interest. And at some point on that escalating scale over a 10-year period and what we earn versus what we would spend, it's got to cross at some point.
That's correct.
And so my question is, I mean, I know you talk about a hybrid, but where that line crosses, wouldn't that be our optimal period of debt versus cash?
Are you talking about this one here?
Instead of being 50-50, it could be 30-70.
It could be, it doesn't have to be 50-50. We use 50-50 only for.
Can you run that so we'll have the best idea of what council
So
could?
do you want us to run the scenarios of 60-40 and be able to do?
Because we have to decide how much we want to hold back for these.
Again, one of the things that we need to understand and is the cost. We need to understand the cost associated with this project, in addition to review again the fund balances that we have and take into consideration the many reserves and the many restrictions that we do have. But yes, to your point, yes, we can run those models. So to give you an idea, is it a 60-40
Although it may be a hybrid,
split?
we may have a 25-75, you know?
Yes,
so,
that can be done.
right.
Well, first, thank you, Steve, for asking that question, because that was my first question at the bottom of my, my paper to ask. And then the second one that I wanted to follow up on, so I didn't pick up the answer, but, Councilwoman Bryson asked a question with regard to none of this would indicate that we would be raising millage to cover any of the expenses. So
No, that's not into consideration, no.
just wanted
And I
to,
would also like to answer that question. I've never in my career brought a budget forward where property tax increase was an option, nor would it be caused by this.
just wanted to confirm those two since I didn't actually hear the answer. May have been thinking about other things. In the past, we've done a really good job with Franny's help of navigating our finances and getting our debt as low as it is. And tremendous kudos to her for that guidance and for our finance team for making it understandable to those of us whose bailiwick is not necessarily finance. But when Matthew came, we were underprepared, and that's where that 5 mills came in to help offset the expenses that we incurred. But along with that, there was a concerted effort to put away funds for an eventual another hurricane episode so that we wouldn't be in that position. That's not this money, correct?
No, it's not.
So when
We're not representing the disaster fund in this slide.
how much money is currently in that other fund?
I knew that question was going to be asked.
I don't think I have it with me.
I don't have
Well,
that
that's-
with me. I will
that's
have
okay.
to get back with you on that.
Just confirming that it's a
Yes.
separate fund, and as I recall from previous reports, that fund is well situated to get us through while we're waiting for FEMA reimbursements should another storm come, so that we wouldn't have to then implement a millage increase to offset. Okay. I just want to make that really clear, because as we talk about this today, there's been a lot of discussion of storms that will come and preparedness and don't want to be behind the 8 ball. We are not behind the 8 ball. We are well prepared for storms to come. So that part of the conversation isn't as substantive to this particular concern or issue with regard to funding beach renourishment as it might have seemed to someone who was listening. And so I just wanted to clarify all of that and make sure I was right. And that was the case. And similar to the way Councilwoman Tunner sees this, I'm a pay-as-you-go person and plan ahead with various accounts and understand the necessity of being able to pull from one so that you're not in a deficit somewhere else and find yourself in trouble. And so I'm more inclined to consider a full cash funding because of many of the things that she pointed out, but also some other revenue streams that haven't been necessarily accounted for that have question marks by them. For instance, we know that we will have at least a one-time infusion of funds from the settlement with Airbnb. And if I recall from that discussion, that is only one of many to come. And that amount is somewhere between $5 and
It's
$6
$5.6 million.
$6 million, correct. So when we're talking about money and available funds, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that those funds are out there and the potential for additional funds to come our way that we have not identified a need for could very well either bolster back up our cash reserves in this case or be attributed to the cash payment. So there's that piece of it. And I wanted to make sure that I was correct in thinking about those dollars. And I think that's a bigger conversation that this council should have, because we have not discussed where that money might find itself in a future budget or needs project. So, I'm going to leave it at that and not belabor it. But I am more inclined to pay cash. I am very interested in the scenarios that Councilman Desmond brought up with regard to the hybrid percentage to cost and what that actually looks like, and what then would make most sense based on the projections of what the ultimate cost is and what our overall expectation with revenues are, much of what Melinda brought up, but also some of these other funds that will be coming through to the town, not to mention anything else. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to, sort of react to where, Mr. DeSimone and Ms. Turner were going. I agree that we gotta get to some point of the type of scenario that you're gonna bring back to us, okay? And there are a lot of assumptions being made right now.
Yes.
But the line graph, I think we need to also consider the fact that what goes into that gap or not gap as you look at this line graph, there's a lot of things in there, okay? We've seen an increase in revenues because of what COVID did for us, okay? But we also have to realize that our expectations of how we spend, I'm gonna say beach money, not beach renourishment money, has changed as well. From an operational standpoint, we have said to Mr. Orlando, we want to do better with our beach operations, and some of that money is coming from this fund, okay? So I don't want to leave that part out as we talk about gap or no gap, all right? The other thing that I want to mention is when it comes to disaster relief, that has to be a part of the conversation as well, because disaster relief doesn't just mean putting more sand on the beach. There are a lot of other expenses that come along with if a hurricane comes through. So while I appreciate us protecting cash or debt during the conversation, those two items, I want to make sure we throw those into the equation as you come back to us with potential, I don't know, 30, 70, 60, 40, I don't know what it's going to be, but all those elements have to be played into it. And I'm asking that you all explain that to us as well, for a couple of reasons. One is we got a lot of new folks up here, okay? And obviously the community is watching. They want answers. Some of this stuff we know, some stuff staff knows, but we need to get to a point where everybody knows exactly what's in the soup as we make these decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, so, you know, I appreciate all of the comments and questions and how y'all presented. You really opened up some eyes there, and I do think that maybe at some point in time, Mark, we need to just have a conversation about analysis of the disaster fund and beach fund as to how we need to move forward. Not saying that needs to be a priority right now, but I think that is a good topic of conversation. And then with this graph here with the debt service coverage ratio, you know, if we're looking at a 4.48, so 4.5 times we're able to pay the debt back, that's pretty strong. But where is the optimal place to be for us? And I'm not saying based off of the experts, but where is our sweet spot? Where does it make the most sense? So those options as you come back with the hybrid model can help us make that decision of saying, okay, this debt service coverage ratio is acceptable and it allows us to move forward and do the things that we need to do. So that's, you know, I liken this to, you know, we've got a lot of unknowns. We don't know what the contractor cost is going to be. We've got to get that so that we can get the funding part put together, and then we can have better conversations with an additional graph like this one. I think that would be a very telling one for us to have with those options. So, Mark, I think, you know, we've heard across the board, but, you know, a hybrid discussion, understanding the true value of it and how it fits our financial model is important. And of course, you know, paying off debt versus keeping that, you know, how that works, what's in the best interest.
Okay. May I add a little bit to this?
Yeah.
So since I've arrived, and it's last week was 4 years, February 21, I'll always remember that date. I've always anticipated borrowing just like we have in the past for the next beach renourishment project. And so Councilman Brown is right, as we started to take a look at some gaps at our beaches, whether that was failing boardwalks, rotting boardwalks, nails shooting up. I mean, I think someone's foot went through one, and we know what happens when that happens. MOBA mats at every beach park, ADA, barrier-free work we've done. We have always taken a look at our dollars that are available, our revenues. And it's interesting, this graph tells us why we're in such great shape, right? March 20, the world shuts down and our revenues started to spike. So we never anticipated to be in this place, but we've always anticipated to evaluate the debt, or I'd say the beach renourishment, every 10 years, but we're at year 8, and some primary and secondary dunes are starting to be impacted, and we know what we know what causes that, and we know what the effects of that are. So I think we're in good shape. I am hearing explore some hybrid options, call it what you want. I'm leaning towards more available funds and less debt. I'm sure Ms. Burnett made her point clear to y'all today that she's leaning towards more debt and less cash, and just even internally, we're balancing that. There are available funds, but I want to make sure that I really clear the air today. We've used beach preservation fees in the past directed by town council to make some improvements to the beach. Not to pay for janitors and landscaping and trees, but to improve boardwalks, stormwater, toilets, leaking roofs, rotting buildings, some things that we haven't put enough effort into over the years. I don't anticipate that we're going to keep doing that for the end of time. We're catching up with some deferred maintenance and some capital project investment. But I do think we're in good shape, and I want to say that today. We have approximately $13 million a year revenue. In addition to paying our debt, we have $39 million in cash reserves, 12 of which is a fund balance restriction. And so that frees up about $26 million. We are on point and on track to what the original plan was 8 years ago when the first issuance was borrowed against. So I just think we're in great shape. I hear you loud and clear. The sweet spot between cost of borrow versus benefit of cash, we will find where those two lines divide, and I will bring it back to you. There are some steps, and Sean and I have been whispering throughout the meeting. Got to get all permits in hand. We are putting contracts together. We're well underway. Permits took us 2 years. We could not, in good faith, put a contract out there without having at least the first permit in hand, right? We couldn't risk that. There's no sense in doing that. So we have to get all permits in hand. We have to bid the project, get the bids in, start looking at contract and contract negotiation. We will bring you back the answers and solutions. Cash first debt. We're going to explore pay off current debt. Really, from my perspective, it's always been an answer of, are we going to try to pay off our first borrowed before we second borrow? That's as complicated as it was, and we started to benefit from great interest rates and great investments and $10 million in investment revenue. We can look at using some H-tax dollars in addition to beach preservation fee, in addition to some funds we're talking about today that are part of a negotiated contract or a negotiated agreement that we talked about. We're going to look at all of that. The settlement funds, as we call them. And then really the mechanism to enact all of this is through ordinance. It's 2 readings. It could be a budget amendment ahead of time. It could be in the next budget. It has to be soon. It has to be before we're under construction, and we have to go under construction. What we didn't talk about today is approximately how much for FEMA?
For FEMA, approximately $7 million.
Approximately $7-ish million of FEMA reimbursements that we're going to expend in phase 1 by end of year. So we'll spend them. We're confident with that. Chris Creed looked us in the eyes and said yes, and Jeff agrees. But that is our decision point. We cannot allow those dollars back. And so I'm going to work with Franny and Adriana, of course, but I'm going to work with all of you directly to figure out some solutions.
I just, while you were talking, I had this
Yeah, I
thought.
see.
And what I think we need to look at is what's the 10-year plan? Right, if we're looking to come back in 10 years to do this again, where do we want to be? right? Knowing that costs are gonna increase. Hopefully, there's another competitor that comes in that reduces the cost a little bit, but what is the ultimate goal? So we kind of get that set now. We got that 10-year CIP looking out forward, going, okay, we're gonna have this again. This is what we need to put away. Or are we gonna have decide that maybe a financing hybrid model is better and use 75% cash, 25% borrow? But, what is it that we need to look at in that realm to help us make some decisions as we take a look at, the Beach Preservation Fund and its funding?
And I'm going to add one thing, and there aren't, and I'm not ashamed or afraid to say this out loud. There are not a lot of town managers in the country that have been through a massive beach renourishment project like this. And this is my first project. This is his first project, and it is his first project. We are more than fine of downshifting other projects so that we don't mess up beach renourishment. There will be trucks, large trucks through neighborhoods, large trucks through our beach parks, mobilizing sand and equipment on the beach. Mr. DeSimone's an expert in this. This is a much larger project than us building an intersection, and we know that. But I want to really make sure that when I present the budget this year, you are going to see, at least from my budget proposal to you, is that we have less projects. And one is the three of us have to be Johnny on the spot for the good, the bad, and the ugly of a beach renourishment project. So I think we're talking a lot about money, but the disruption that's caused and the chaos and the opportunity from a beach renourishment project is really our first time. And so whatever goes wrong, we keep trying to look at Chris down there and say, why didn't you tell us? But I will also say, thank goodness he's close by and with us, and I appreciate him very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, for raising that question about what are we gonna do in 10 years? That was what I was asking about. Are we gonna be able to accumulate money over time with paying the debt service so that the next time we don't have to borrow the whole thing? So I think that's a good idea. Also, looking at the projections flatlining up there, we know that our ATAX revenues might shrink. And so it's possible that the same sources for those funds would be beach renourishment fees, or beach preservation fees, sorry. And so that amount might drop as well. And so I dare ask the question, I understand the 1% comes from statutory authorization, is that correct? The 1%.
You're talking about the ATAX, local ATAX?
The beach preservation fee of 1%.
2%.
Oh, sorry, 2%, okay. Oh, okay, well then, there goes my idea to go 2%. But anyhow, but what I was really thinking of is that where does the authority come from? And in a 10-year plan, do we need to be thinking about going to 2.5%? I'll throw that number. I'm just throwing a number out for us to think about.
Are we maxed at 2%? Yeah.
And so it would take statutory authority from the legislature to increase that percentage. But that might be something, I'm just thinking out loud about a 10-year plan, about what other possibilities there might be that we need to look at.
Well, I will tell you that there are other municipalities that are working on a statutory level to make some adjustments at the state level to have additional funding options, and it hasn't been very well received as of yet.
I'm not surprised.
So that is something that is being pushed.
And if I could, Ms. Bryson raises the point I'm trying to make sure you all hear and our community hears. Since our last beach renourishment project, COVID helped. However, I don't think that sentence has ever been said out loud before. Not except here. We have on purpose and just because of the economy have reserves of $39 million, 12 of which are restricted, 26 million are available, let alone some other funds. We heard about some dollars today. There's H-tax dollars. There's fund balance well above and beyond your fund balance. And so I understand the sentiment to try to use the cash. I will say that it's never been the intention that we use all cash for this, at least from my knowledge. And so some of this is changing, but I want to make sure the community hears. There's $26 million of cash available right now above and beyond a $12 million restricted account. The town council currently and in the past have made some very good decisions with our funds.
Well, and that's where we rely on
Right.
you know, some of the experts in the room and Franny as well. So, Mr. Alfred.
Is there any reason to be nervous looking into the future about potential FEMA reimbursements, either because of rising disasters of various kinds around the country or political reasons?
Yes, absolutely. You know, until the money is in our account, I'm not going to count on it. However, we have a timeline, we have an agreement with FEMA, so this isn't an expenditure where we are simply anticipating reimbursement. We've worked with them on what is reimbursable, what isn't. There's an agreement in place, a time limit in place. So I feel confident. It's a matter of spending it properly, making the proper requisitions for fund distribution properly, and timing. Timing is of the essence right now. But this is a little different than the risk of, we just had a storm last week, hopefully FEMA pays us back. This is separate than that type of event and that type of reimbursement. We're already past that. So, there's always a risk though.
All right, Kimberly, do we have anybody signed up to speak on this?
We do. We've got one on this item and then two non-agendas.
Okay. And remember, when you're called up, to state your name, address. We got 3 minutes. Keep the decorum, so.
We have Amber Kuhn first.
Okay.
I basically signed up. I'm Amber Kuhn, Managed Sea Turtle Patrol. I'll be participating. I've participated in several beach renourishments, 3 to be exact. And I do want to say thank you to Mark Orlando for increasing the beach operations project. I appreciate Alex's comment about it's not just the sand. You know, there's a program called Sea Turtle Patrol that's been there for 30 years that still operates out of a tent in a parking lot, and I've spoken to you guys about that. I've also spoken to you guys about reusable water bottles, which I will bring at the next town council meeting to give to you. So I just am appreciative of the town and what they do. It's not a question of whether we're gonna renourish the beach or not, it's when. And you know, the 2017 renourishment was not planned. It was a 2016 renourishment for Matthew. They had to back up and punt and go back. But 2017 was Matthew plus Irma equals emergency renourishment in Sea Pines. And that lasted for 3 months. I didn't get a lot of feedback from residents and people on the beach about inconveniences, even though you've got large pipes and, you know, bulldozers occasionally situated. They are, the bulldozers at least are confined to a construction area. It's not the whole beach. And this time we aren't even in the main section of Tourist Beach at the time that we are doing, you know, the tourist season. So, you know, sea turtles, we move the nests, we move over 50% of them anyway. And so we'll be moving a few of those. And I congratulate you guys for getting a permit that the dog only was restricted in Mitchellville because they wanted all of Port Royal Plantation. I don't know how you did it, but that was impressive. So I knew they were gonna do it. That was inevitable. It's been going on for years. And suddenly we just get a piece of stretch of Mitchellville that's on an island that actually wasn't there before. It just kind of appeared. So, you know, whether it stays or not is to be determined. And I have a question for Chris. If we put rock groins in at Dolphin Head, will it keep the sand there? Like, is there a potential that the next renourishment will not include Dolphin Head, Pine Island?
Answer that after we're done.
Right, okay. I'll talk to you later. Thank you, guys. That's it.
Ready for the non-agenda?
Yes, non-agenda items now.
D. Anthony?
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Dee Anthony. I live at 9 Walking Horse Street. I would like to commend the Public Safety Committee as well as the CDC on their last meeting. I noticed especially on the Public Safety Committee, dialogue and conversations amongst each other and constituents were being had. This leads me to a question. What is the protocol or process for town council meetings? Do town council members have an allotted time to speak? I find it very uncomfortable that one council member's 18 minutes of speaking was called out by another council member. I would hope that all council members are discussing and asking questions about the issues. I believe it's more important to be engaged and listening to the constituents rather than timing each other. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you, thank you.
Ashley Phillips.
Good afternoon, Ashley Phillips, Indigo Run. Kind of what Dee just talked about. I wanted to speak about an observation I made at the last town council meeting. One member really hit the nail on the head when he asked, could the council have a conversation, an open dialogue regarding a specific topic with council members? The answer was no. By all appearances, the council seems dysfunctional and hostile towards one another. No wonder you guys can't get anything accomplished. I would challenge each of you to ask yourself, am I working to the best of my ability for all the people of Hilton Head Island? We expect more from our elected representatives than what we are witnessing. Please do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all.
All. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to adjournment. Thank you all very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.